What's up, guys? Today we're going to be comparing two of what I think currently are probably the best brands in terms of entry level, and I mean really entry level, under $100 watches that you can buy. You have obviously Invicta, that's been around for quite some time nowadays. It has been the first watch, at least the diver line has been the first watch of many watch fanatics, myself included. And then you have pretty much a newcomer to the game, that's Pagani. They've gained quite a lot of notoriety over the last year because they've produced some really impressive pieces for the price. So first of all, let's start comparing these two offerings, which would be the kind of homage to the Rolex Daytona. The left we have the Invicta Speedway in the two-tone rose gold and stainless steel, and on the right we have the Pagani, kind of like a Snoopy white, or kind of like I'm not too sure what you'd call it, but it's white dial with a black bezel. Let's start off with Invicta. Now, when it comes to Invicta, you have, in my opinion, a more attention to detail. You have a more elaborate dial with a few more things going on. For example, you have that textured background with what seems to be like a shell pattern in the middle, surrounded by kind of like a diamond pattern, a crisscross pattern. It looks very nice. The sub-dials are with a goldish tone that play really nicely with the light. You also have the applied Invicta logo, which I actually think it's a pretty decent logo, to be honest. And then you have applied indices throughout, and you have obviously the calendar at the 5 o'clock. On the Pagani, you have a similar placement in terms of the logo, the sub-dials, and the calendar, but you have a printed dial and applied indices with chromed edges. So definitely, I think in terms of attention to detail, you have a bit more of effort on the Invicta than on the Pagani. However, keep in mind the Invicta currently is selling for around $20 to $30 more than the Pagani. As far as I know, they're both using the same Seiko Mecha Quartz movement, which is a very solid movement. Anyone who's owned one knows that they are good movements to have, especially in a chronograph for this price. For under $100, or really in my opinion for under $1,000, you shouldn't be getting an automatic chronograph, and there's an argument to be made about not getting an automatic chronograph at all. But in terms of having either one of these watches, I think you can't really go wrong. I mean, the things that you can compare, for example, are the pushers. I think that the pushers on the Pagani stick out just a bit too much. They're both screw-down pushers, and you have a screw-down crown on both of them. The action for both of these pushers, both on the Invicta and the Pagani, is pretty much identical. There's nothing really to it. They are decent pushers. Nothing amazing, nothing incredible, but they are decent enough, and they work with no problem. Now, keep in mind that the Invicta that I'm showing you has been through quite a bit of abuse, and the pushers no longer work. However, that is not a problem of the watch itself. I've had quite a few of the watches of the same model with no issue. This was just because this has been dropped quite a few times, so keep that in mind. However, I think that the profile on the crown and pushers on the Invicta is much nicer. It has a lower profile, doesn't stick out as much, especially with the crown. The crown on the Pagani sticks out just a bit too much, in my opinion. On the Invicta, it has a nice flat profile, which I think looks classier, looks more expensive. Then obviously you have the bezel, and this is one of the biggest differences, besides the fact obviously that the Invicta has a hardlex crystal and the Pagani has a sapphire crystal, but the bezel on the Pagani is indeed ceramic, so you're definitely going to get more scratch resistance than the Invicta, which, as you can see, is pretty much scratched to hell, and that is obviously because it's just a stainless steel or aluminium. I'm not sure, I can't tell you exactly what the bezel is on the Invicta, but it definitely is a scratch magnet. So far the Pagani hasn't shown any scratches. Now, one of the things that I like about the Invicta is the fact that they have gone for quite a low profile, not just in the crown but also in the actual diameter of the watch. I don't really have those stats at the moment. I'm going to leave all these links in the description so you can go through the stats and specifications. But I think that just the way that they've designed the case and the bezel of the Invicta, it's a bit neater, it's a bit tighter. I think on the Pagani the bezel juts out just a bit too much, especially at the end, at the bottom of the case. However, once again, there's not really much difference between the two. On the back of the Invicta, you have this kind of sticker-esque design with the Invicta logo in the middle, obviously once again paying homage to Rolex, and on the Pagani you have a Pagani design logo, which once again is nothing special. Now, what I do have to say in terms of both the chronograph watches and the dive watches is that the bracelets on the Invictas are much better than the bracelets on the Paganis, at least in my experience. Some people may prefer the one on the Pagani because it has a better clasp, that I do have to admit. However, that better clasp comes at the expense of the clasp falling apart. I've owned about 4 or 5 Paganis now. Some of them I've given to relatives, some of them I have myself, and there's only been one of them that hasn't had an issue with the clasp. For example, in this one, the part that tightens it down fell off and I can't find the bar for it, and it's just a very, very cheap bracelet. Now, it looks good once you've got it on your wrist and it's secure enough, even though it may fall apart at any moment, but it is a secure bracelet and it does look good. So there's not much in terms of looks between them. However, in terms of the fluidity, that obviously is going to add to the comfort. If you compare it, for example, to the Invicta bracelet, I'm sorry I'm out of focus here, but if you compare it to the Invicta bracelet is just going to take it with no problem. And honestly, I think the Invicta has a very good bracelet, even for watches that I've owned that go up to $400 or $500. I've seen much worse bracelets than the Invicta Speedway and the Invicta Diver on watches that cost literally $500, especially Seikos. So keep that in mind. I've always liked the Invicta bracelets, that oyster style bracelet that they have. Now, obviously on the Speedway, I've decided to put this Harris Tweed strap, which is by Vario, if I'm not mistaken. It's made by a company called Vario. They make some really nice straps in case you want to check them out. But definitely I think in terms of overall value, there's not really much between the two and you'd be happy with either one of them. Now, let's talk about the BLWRX that we have here. Yes, that is probably the worst watch brand name that I've ever seen in my life, and it's probably one of the reasons why so few people talk about these guys, because just people don't want to wear a watch that looks kind of afar like a Rolex logo, and it looks obviously in terms of design like a Rolex. So people feel like they're wearing kind of a bad replica when you put this watch on, and that's a shame, because for this watch that you can find for around $180, $190, it's a very, very nice watch. To start off with, you have supposedly, allegedly, I'm not confirming this at all, keep in mind this is a Chinese brand, very, very unknown brand, but they say they have 1,000 meter water resistance. They have a sapphire crystal, that sunburst blue dial, very, very nice finishing on the case, on the bezel, on the dial, those indices with the chromed edges. Even in the macro shots that I did when I did the review, which you'll be able to find on this channel, everything, it looks really neat, really nice. And you have that ceramic bezel also. Once again, that sunburst blue dial plays with the light really, really nicely. And I probably have to say that actually has a nicer sunburst effect than the Pagani, which would kind of be the equivalent to the Rolex Hulk, which we have here on my right. I think the sunburst effect on the BLWRX is a bit nicer, and you do have a better fit and finish on the case. Now, keeping in mind that the bracelet on this watch is absolutely terrible. I took it off as soon as I got this watch. However, in terms of fit and finish on this watch, I really like the screw down crown. It's similar to the Tudor Black Bay, Tudor Pelagos crown, which I really, really like, and I much prefer that style of a crown, than, especially for a diver, than the style of a crown on the Submariner homage that Pagani and Invicta make. Now, once again, as I said, it is quite unfortunate that these guys have gone for such an ugly name, because it's definitely something that's going to hold them back in terms of making sales. And at the end of the day, I mean, for these specs with the Seiko NH35 movement, which both of the other divers by Invicta and Pagani also have, I mean, there's not really a need to spend an extra $100 or a bit more for this watch compared to either the Pagani or the Invicta, in terms of specs at least. So now let's go on to the main event, which is the battle of probably the two best under $100 divers that you can buy currently. So on my left, to start off with, we have the Invicta Pro Diver. This was my first automatic watch, and this is the watch that started my obsession, you could say, my watch collecting, and it's a watch that I have beaten up like you have no idea. I've taken this watch to about 10 or more countries, and it's been in all kinds of different situations. I've dropped it a bunch of times and it is still taken with no problem. Still holds great time. Obviously it's going to show some signs of wear, especially on the bezel. Keep in mind it's an aluminum insert bezel which does scratch and scrape very easily. The crystal is also Harlex crystal, so it does scratch as well. However, it's not as drastic, as dramatic a scratch as you would expect it to have after about 5 years of constant use and abuse. So it is a very scratch resistant crystal too. Don't think that because it's not sapphire it's just going to be a scratch magnet. Now on the Pagani you obviously have a ceramic bezel and you have a sapphire crystal, so in terms of scratch resistance then the Pagani definitely has the Invicta beat. Keep in mind that the Invicta is selling for around $20 to $30 more than the Pagani. The Invicta you can find for around $70 to $80, while the Pagani you can pick it up from $70 to $75, and if you get it on a discount like I did, you can pick it up for around $60 or even $50 odd if you look around. I paid $59 for mine, so you can definitely pick up some discounts when they have the sales on websites like AliExpress, for example. Now, both of these watches have a very similar style. You have the Cyclops window, which personally I think is much better on the Pagani, as it fills in the whole calendar, while the Invicta isn't really doing much of anything, as you can tell in these images. In terms of the actual dial design, you have a printed dial on the Pagani, and you have a dial with an applied Invicta logo on the Invicta. The pip definitely goes to the Pagani. They have a much nicer pip, much more in keep with an actual Rolex pip, whereas the Invicta has kind of this cheaper looking pip. However, on the Pagani it's not completely aligned. As you can see, it's off to the left just a bit, so keep that in mind. However, the bezel I have to say goes to the Invicta, because the Invicta just has painted on markers, or while the Pagani actually has them cut out, so you do feel some depth as you run your fingers over the markers on the bezel. So I definitely have to say that the bezel is better on the Invicta. On the actual dial, I much prefer the seconds hand the Invicta has with that logo at the end. I think it looks very nice and adds a bit of extra details to the watch. I much prefer the applied chromed out Invicta logo than the printed on Pagani design logo, just mainly because I prefer applied logos, but secondly because I just don't like the Pagani design logo at all. I think it looks really cheap. In terms of the applied indices, it's just a different style. The Invicta has a smaller face, and it has this kind of chapter ring on the inside, which gives a bit more depth to the watch, while the Pagani design doesn't have this. So the dial on the Pagani design definitely looks a lot bigger than it already is compared to the Invicta. In terms of the sunburst effect and the green tone, I definitely prefer how the green looks on the Pagani design than just the standard black on the Invicta, but keep in mind that you can also get different color Invictas as well as different color of the Pagani design watch. Now, the clasp on this once again has issues. It doesn't close down properly, so just so you see that I'm not making this up, I mean all these clasps I've had have issues except one. On the back you have a display case back for the Seiko NH35 movement. They haven't done anything to the rotor, so it's a pretty orderly movement to look at. However, I think most people who are buying their first watch, for example, will be over the moon to be able to look at the movement at all. So that's always a good thing on these kind of watches at this price range. On the Invicta you have much more attention to detail in the watch back design. You have that very nice yellow rotor with a whole load of text from Invicta, and if you look at the side, there's also the Invicta logo on the side of this watch. Now, a lot of people hate this logo. Personally, to be honest, I don't mind it. I think it's perfectly fine, and it doesn't cheapen the watch in any way, in my opinion. Now, to end this video out, I mean, once again, both of these watches for the price are just incredibly good. I mean, incredibly good, especially in terms of actual materials used. The Pagani having a ceramic bezel, Seiko NH35 movement, sapphire crystal, sunburst blue dial, a bracelet with screw links. I mean, That's just incredible. The fact that they can sell that for $70 and still make a profit, as I assume they're doing, it's just incredible. I mean, I really, really, I was shocked the first time I actually got one of these watches in my hand. And while the Invicta still remains the OG, many people are going to go for the Invicta just because they prefer the looks of it, but they are both excellent watches. You can't go wrong with any of the watches I've shown in this video, and for the price of the Paganis and the Invictas, you're going to be happy with either one you pick, whether it be a chronograph, whether it be a diver, whether it be both. You're going to be more than happy with them, as I am. I have many watches in my collection. I have watches that cost several $1,000s, and I still use the Pagani and the Invicta often just because they're good looking workhorse pieces. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this little comparison. Till the next time, peace.